Happy Monday, everybody. How's it going?
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Good.
Three of us are just post Austin here, I guess. Day-to-day tech
Yeah. All three of us were in Austin except for John here, but John could have been in Austin, I guess.
next year.
I was in Dallas, so yeah, I just one city off. Yeah.
Jeez. Well, that's the off by one error you don't want to make. So, but yeah, it was a fun time. I think it was the day-to-day Texas definitely was one of my favorite events probably ever. I think.
Yeah, I
It's
think
cool.
so. Compared to like some of the ones that are in London, there was much more of a community feel to it and a bit more fun aspect than too serious.
Yeah, definitely not serious. I think as a party masquerading as a conference, but
Yeah.
but the speaker lineup, don't let that fool you. It was, I think, the strongest speaker lineup I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So
Well, and just really great talks too. Not just great speakers, but like really great, thoughtful talks with lots of insights for now and the future.
Yeah, much more focus on business value rather than actual technology. So technology enabling business
there's some
outcomes.
technology stuff though too.
Yeah, but it was enabling more focus on enabling business value.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, whatever. All right. So anyway, we have John Kutay on the show today. John, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. I'm a director of product over at Striim, where I was also one of the founding engineers. Striim is a unified data streaming machine data capture product. A lot of our customers use us for real-time and near real-time use cases, and we can dive into that a bit, but mostly just want to talk about some of the real-world streaming patterns while I'm on here. So thanks so much for having me.
Anytime. Yeah, I think we met at a reInvent and we had a good time hanging out. So I was like, this guy would be fun to have on the show. So
Oh, yeah.
here we are.
And you invited us to a podcast. When was that? Was that like 6 months
We
ago?
yeah, we were.
No, it was only like, I think it was only like 6 weeks ago.
That's what
Matt-
Matt
felt like
thinks in
6
terms of
months
dog
ago.
years. So
Yeah.
yeah, and Kristen says looks like we're keeping the party going. Yeah, geez.
Yeah, especially if you're having me on this show. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
a musician too, and he's a he's a cool guy. But yeah, let's talk about this. I think we're talking about streaming data in the enterprise and the the easy parts and the hard parts. Which one do you want to start with? I guess it's a coin flip that one.
Let's start with easy. We could sequence it that way. I don't want to scare people to feel like, oh, there's like an easy mode that you have to do and a hard mode that you shouldn't do. It's actually like, I mean, it's give and take, right? The more you put into it, the more you're gonna get out of it. So I'll start with the easy.
Let's do it.
Cool. So, I there's a lot of opinions on approaching data streaming. A lot of teams are sort of used to their batch way of the world, and I've seen a lot of opinions out there that if you're doing batch today and 30-minute latencies and those type of things are good enough for your business, then you may or may not need streaming. And I think that's kind of that way of thinking has kind of stopped a lot of people from getting into streaming because it just seems complex if you're used to the batch world. But the way that I actually see data streaming playing out with business use cases and actually delivering data to consumers, there's a couple ways to approach it, and I always see kind of two. I like breaking it into two patterns. There's this easy mode and hard mode. Easy mode is a good way to kind of get your feet wet. It's essentially more of a technical data streaming use case where I'm streaming data sort of ETL or ELT style from a source to a target. And my goals and metrics with this project are more technical, where I'm looking at metrics like, hey, latency between the source target system. How many records am I dropping? How many records are ACKed by the target? Am I able to monitor my costs? Or am I able to monitor the underlying infrastructure if I'm managing it myself? And when you have, when you're just doing a technical integration like that, it's nice because you're just working with systems. You're not working with people yet with the streams, and I'll get into that when we talk about the hard mode of data streaming. So let's take a real world use case like, hey, I just want to stream data from a Postgres CDC stream. I'm going to do my replication slot, something along those lines. I'm going to stream that into maybe even a data warehouse that's ingesting data in batches, like a Snowflake or a BigQuery. Even though they both are starting to support streaming inserts. But once you start getting that use case going, you get it deployed, and you're able to sort of monitor those technical metrics. It's going to prepare you to take on some of the harder use cases in the future. So it's good to phase it that way. So when you do approach the business saying, hey, I think we can do real time. This is the way we would deploy it. These are the type of things we would monitor.
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, one thing we often tell our clients is that almost everyone, almost any business has some use case where streaming would make a difference in their business. And so the key to like really bringing in streaming is to identify at least one use case where that's the case. What I will say is when I've seen companies try to boil the ocean and do everything streaming, I've rarely seen success doing that, and it ends up being very, very expensive. Maybe if you're Google or Facebook or something, you can get away with that, but like small companies just don't have the resources. But there are almost always these places where like some kind of a real-time recommender or something is actually going to make a big difference in the business.
I think identifying that use case is quite critical, because if part of that use case requires something that is batch, it's no longer a stream. You know, you're actually putting a dependency on it. I use the term the longest pole in the tent. You know, that the tent doesn't become a tent until that last pole is in there. So if you think you've got a use case that you want to have for streaming, and it requires on something that's coming via batch, it's probably not the best use case to identify, or best use case to use for that scenario.
Sorry, Chris is getting mauled by my dog here.
We've got a dog here.
We've all been there, Chris.
She's been barking at me up until now, so this is progress.
Yeah,
good. Now that you're on the stream, you're best friends.
Exactly. I haven't got any food. I don't want you off though.
She smells a Marmite on you, I think so. So that's
yeah. And to your point, Matt, and Chris as well, that there's a few ways to approach it, and exactly, you don't want to boil the ocean. I do see data streaming becoming simpler as we see more cloud service providers and warehouses making it a first-class citizen. So it's not like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, actually, when we originally started working on Striim, like the only way you could do data streaming was kind of build it yourself. There were really low-level API-based frameworks like Twitter Storm that were kind of circulating at the time, or you had to buy a single node kind of on the expensive side system like a Striim base or something along those lines that you had to deploy on specialized hardware, which was always tough. But now we have cloud service providers that have Striim systems that you can deploy in a single click. You have our product Striim that's also a fully managed service. You have Snowflake is starting to support streaming ingest, which is going to make it a lot easier for teams that already know how to use batch-based systems. So I think that's one of the main things that we're seeing is just more ecosystem development. Of course, everyone knows who Confluent is, and they made an interesting acquisition in Immerok, so they're starting to kind of absorb the Flink community, which is cool to see.
It's awesome. And Sonny Rivera, good morning, Sonny, has a good point here. Next best actions or next best offers are very common use cases for streaming and the associated data sets. It's a good application of it.
Yeah.
What do you all think about this?
Yeah. So again, I think this is a great use case. And, I think just last week, High Touch made an announcement about, real-time personalization APIs that you can build on top of the warehouse. So again, this is like another example where if I'm a data team, we already have our warehouse. Now I can just start building these real-time APIs on top of it with other SaaS tools that give me kind of a point-and-click experience. So, I don't have to just start building this infrastructure from scratch. It's just an incremental thing to deliver on top of my existing data stack. So, next best actions is something that off the top of my head, I think could work with that type of stack.
Do you think data modeling has an impact on how you can get the best out of your streaming projects?
Yeah, so I'll get into that a little bit with when I kind of say the hard mode of data streaming, which is kind of the next step, which is I actually have business consumers that are relying on these data streams and they have an SLA. And this is where I actually think the data mesh book has a lot of really insightful content on this topic, and also your book as well. Yeah,
I don't have that one here.
By Zhamak Dehghani. Do you have your book lying around?
I don't know. I only have this in Kate's book, but
you probably sold all of them by now.
Yeah, but anyway, Data Mesh, good book. Go get it.
Great book.
read it.
And from your book, there was chapter 5 where you do talk about, the, data being generated from the source system. So if I talk about terminology like change data capture or write ahead logs or things along those lines, those are all defined in Joe and Matt's book. So you can look it up there. But when the hard mode is really when, you have these streams deployed and now you have business consumers who are actually, using those streams for their use cases. So like, let's say, just like the one that came from Q&A from the audience, next best actions, right? Maybe there's some kind of sales or marketing group that's actually using your transactional streams to make those next best offers. Now, that's the type of thing that you want fresh data for. And fresh data versus low latency, I think there's actually a bit of a distinction there as well. And I had a Twitter exchange with one of the Kafka engineers at LinkedIn over this, where essentially there's two types of ways of looking at latency and data freshness. Data freshness is really from the target side, seeing how fresh and recent is the data in my target. So it could be my warehouse compared to the upstream source systems like my database transactions. And that's almost like the delta of the latest record in my warehouse and the last transaction that happened in my source system. Whereas latency is really gauging the performance of my streaming system. When there is a record being inserted, how long does it take to go from A to B, right? And there's a bit of distinction there because the freshness will capture the issue where maybe there's a transaction, a long running transaction on my source system that hasn't committed, and we were able to capture it before the archive logs rolled over. That wouldn't be captured by like a latency test. That would only be captured by a data freshness. So I always, when I work with data teams, I always train them to look at those types of metrics to see really that really defines your pipeline health. And yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think it kind of falls along the lines of temporality, like bitemporal and I guess tritemporal. Tritemporal being when you make a decision on data, how and so that definitely falls into that.
Well, it kind of raises another issue here, which is part of the reason that streaming is hard is that you're actually talking about several different layers to make it work, right? You can talk about the CAP theorem and how one database can only do a handful of basically two things really well. And so basically with these streaming systems, what we effectively have is multiple databases and layers and buffers. And this is why managed services have become so important, because the complexity of managing this infrastructure on your own is very, very high. And so like moving that part off so you can focus on the business value and other aspects of your data is really, really critical, I think, for most small organizations, unless you have unless again, you're like a really big tech company that can do this on your own.
Yeah, it goes back to that comment I made about data modeling earlier and the example of streaming. Sonny's example about streaming for next actions or next best offers. And I think the operational world and the data world coming closer together. We're working together. If you know what the keys are, or the business key, or the way to join onto that stream with something you've pre-calculated with an algorithm to say, right, if this now happens with this key, that's what you need to do. But the two worlds haven't been that well connected up until now, and you may have a surrogate key that's or an internal key from the application, which means nothing, and the data warehouses not even capture that at that point, and they turn it to a business key. Having the ability to be able to join that to the stream is something I haven't seen done very well in the past, and that's because normally it's after the horse is bolted, you decide to actually go and do that. So I do think that the two worlds working closer together would help actually getting more use cases that we could do some real-time decisioning with stream data.
Yeah, being able to model the data in the stream is something I've definitely worked with our users on those type of use cases, because those are the type of situations where they can't rely on a sequence of batch jobs running in the warehouse to deliver data within the type of SLAs that they need. I mean, imagine you're in logistics or retail, or you're trying to do these real-time offers, or you even get a sense of if you are running the type of business where time is money, like let's say you're an airline and you need to deploy maintenance crews in real time, or you're a logistics company and you need to know where every package is at every second, right? So in those cases, they are actually doing in-stream data modeling where they're doing the transformations, putting the data into the business consumable format in Stream, and then landing it in the warehouse in that exact format, so they can say, okay, we know that when the data is delivered to the target, it's not just the staging or the bronze or the the non-prod environment. It's actually the prod environment that users are consuming. And I think that's only really technically achievable by doing that modeling in the streaming layer. Now that's not for every type of modeling job. Obviously, batch is useful, just like streaming is useful. I always look to Michael Stonebreaker, who says no one size fits all, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been talking to a company. I think it's DFDM Data, talking about logistics and predictable keys. So actually, the whole supply chain management of each of the location, the package, the route even. I'm getting more American, aren't I? So yeah, and having that in a predictable business key that then can be shared across entities is going to again simplify that whole decisioning process when any of that data comes through, because it's not tied to the source system it's come from. It's something that can be understood, and we're talking to them about how you can actually put like checksums or like a lum check like you do with PCI stuff to make sure it's still valid. But that sort of innovation or that sort of forward thinking is going to open up a lot more opportunities, I think, for streaming.
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely a team structure issue here too, which Joe and I have talked about a lot, and that is traditionally your analytics side and your application development side are very separated. And so application development has one data model that they use for production, and then you typically are like remodeling the data in batch into analytics. And as we're realizing, kind of like you were saying, John, that this is analytics is now a production issue, these two sides need to merge, and their data models really need to merge. And so in the application development process, we need to think about a model that works for both sides, both for the application and directly into the stream.
It's something I've been jokingly calling ETL 2.0. I'm sure that's already been taken, but I mean, you had the batch oriented ETL,
3.0 then.
kind of like Web 5. But but I mean, it's really the notion that ETL, when Bill came up with it ages ago, it was a batch oriented world back in the day, right? That's kind of how it was. But streaming transformations, it's not a new thing, but I think with the democratization and simplification of streaming systems, it's going to be more top of mind. I think ELT certainly got its place in the batch world. And maybe taking streams and landing them into a static environment for a bit, but as you point out, the use cases for processing in flight and providing kind of instantaneous value or fresh data, however you want to describe it, whatever is useful to the end customer, like that's getting over the next several years going to become, that's going to be the way we do stuff. I mean, I sort of predict that batch is going to go the way of like the dial-up modem in some ways. And so
will that become STL, Stream Transform Load?
You heard it here first.
STL, ETL 3.0.
Yeah.
So we have to have a buzzword consortium on this. So
answer on a postcard. We'll take votes on what.
Should we vote on it now? Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think we've been observing. I think in our book we call it the live data stack. But however it ends up being called, it doesn't really matter to me. But in practice, that's at least our supposition, and it kind of goes back to the notion of data mesh too. Really, it's the whole notion of data mesh is a shift left back to the software engineers really, and develop data products. And so there's
absolutely, and I find myself when I'm coaching teams through the data streaming deployment process and how they want to organize it, I do pull up like chapter 12 from Zamak's book, the data mesh book, talking about sourcing data from operational systems, because she's kind of put it together perfectly.
Yep.
The collaborating operational system is not the analytics team's best friend, right? It's really hard to work with a DBA team that's focused on their customers, right? Because that database is focused on uptime of the actual business and the operation that it's focused to. The internal analytics team is almost like a second tier consumer of that data. And to be able to get to that data, in a reliable real-time fashion requires a bit of cross-functional collaboration, It's always tough. I always have these conversations like, oh, this team doesn't want to turn on CDC. They don't want me touching the database. We're gonna have to set up a downstream, and those are the types of discussions that need to be had. And ultimately it's about compromise and being very aware of what's technically capable within your organization. And I said, look, if we have to talk to your executive leadership about like what you really need to get this use case done, because the use case is, that's stamped, right? And everyone's agreed at your company that we want real time this, or some kind of business use case, but they haven't rubber stamped the thing that the DBAs need to open log access for this use case to actually make it work. Right. So and it's a hard technical conversation to have, but ultimately the fact is the types of teams that I work with that have implemented that, years later they're still at the company, their teams are growing, they're doing very well, and it's because there's so much business skin in the game with these types of use cases. And I've been on the most glorious victory laps with data teams that have delivered on those operational initiatives, and it's always amazing. I've also been on the hottest escalations where it's like a Sev 1 prod issue that the business relies on as being down. But no matter what, those are the types of data teams, whether they're having those escalations or those victory laps, those are the type of data teams that persist in the company and keep growing because they have so much visibility. Everyone knows what they're doing, right? They're right in the heart of the company's operations. And I think that is kind of a side effect of these real-time use cases, because why would you be doing real-time unless you had that hardcore use case that's actually bringing value to the business?
Yep.
Let me follow. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say about the metadata associated to it. So there's a bit of, I think I've coined the thing metadata at the well, sorry, meta model at the moment, and I think that metadata is the new focus I think we should have, and having that metadata follow the stream as well, so it can be reused, is going to simplify and bring those two worlds together. The operational systems, they know that, they understand that data already, they've already defined it. If they can send that metadata so that can be reused in any stream. And I think there's a Carl just point saying STL is still batch though, and I thought maybe I can add another letter into the acronym, but I don't think it's going to work because I thought I put decisioning in it. So stream, transform, decision load, but it's STDL, so maybe that's not the best. Yeah, so we're gonna have to reinvent that one. I think
we're gonna have to rethink that one.
What time is it, Chris?
You heard it here first.
STDs. I just wanted to follow on to what Dom was saying too about team structures. I think there's definitely another organizational layer that goes beyond the technical here, and that's what we've seen again and again is that the app teams don't really get credit for analytics, because often your analytics teams, like your analysts or DBAs, sit a bit closer to the business. And so they're the ones who get credit for it. And if you really want to encourage that collaboration, you have to make sure that the app teams, when they provide high quality and low latency analytic data, get credit for that process. And then there's that sense of collaboration. Like Joe, you talk a lot about incentives and how they affect businesses and outcomes. In fact, you have one quote you really love on this.
I have one quote. What?
Oh, the quote about show me an incentive and I'll show you an outcome.
Oh yeah, Charlie Munger's quote. Yeah, it's kind of the golden rule of the universe. So, Chris, you look like you want to say something. Hopefully not about STDs.
No.
Thanks.
No.
All right.
You carry on.
Or for free, it's a safe group. You can
it's just the internet. It's just live streaming on the internet. Yeah,
I've revealed much more on the internet before, anyway, accidentally sometimes. Yeah, you've lost me now on that one. I think going back to that, is when streaming becomes batch, and it's how much that decisioning you can actually do in line during that on that flow. And I think that just comes back down to that data modeling piece and having the right way of not having to do that transform. So if you've already got that nice logical join that you can add to it, there's no transformation needed. It's just join the two things together at that point, making a decision. So maybe it's okay. Maybe it's stream, decision, transform, load, which is actually okay as an acronym and not as bad as the other one. So yeah, we're evolving as we speak on this.
I love it. Yeah. On the fly on a live stream. That's the.
What are some of the talk about some of the easy parts and some of the I would say the random parts. What about the hard parts?
So when we get into the hard parts, those are like the real data streaming products, like I mentioned.
Yeah.
So when we talk about data products, we mean that there's a real like business use case. You have consumers. The data's it's not just like, okay, CDC, from my database in a staging table. That's not a data product, right? Data product is a real-time offer. It's a pilot assignment to a logistics airline, right? It's things like that, right? Those are real world data products, and that's where, again, high risk but very, very high reward because it's so visible in the company. But that's where things like data contracts come into play. Both of you have really good content on data contracts. Chad Sanderson is doing a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah.
And data contracts, and I've written about that and also spoken about data contracts and kind of the batch versus the streaming world. And my last talk at DBT Coalesce actually was a bit about maintaining data freshness and data contract SLAs, and that's kind of where I brought up some of the little thorny topics, because DBT has this really cool tool in it, and if anyone doesn't know, it's DBT's a modeling tool that's mainly used on top of warehouses like Snowflake and BigQuery, etc. So, but it has this really nice data freshness check tool, which will essentially tell you the time of the last model run. But if you really rely on that for like end-to-end data freshness, you might run into issues where, okay, maybe the ETL job didn't complete.
Right.
Maybe one of the intermediate transform jobs that are upstream of that model didn't run properly because it was missing some data. It might not even be something you can capture in the transform layer, because for all you know, the data was missing from the actual write-ahead log itself because it rolled over, or you didn't have access to it, long-running transaction, any of these kind of upstream thorny issues, right? And these are the types of things that you run into. So making sure that either you have a plan to implement the monitoring of the end-to-end stack and catch these type of data quality or data lag issues, or you have like a product that'll handle it out of the box. So I think that ultimately the data contracts part can be complicated, because remember, like I said, the data team, the analytics team, is almost like a second tier consumer of that data to the operational team. It's not the business. And I actually last week at work witnessed in-house, a data contract violation or a schema change.
Ooh.
And there was no way that you could automatically have handled the schema change, because it was like completely like in the logical layer of like the way you would even compute it. And that was a data contract violation. The schema change, there's no way to automatically handle it. But why did the schema change? It was to meet the needs of an external customer, and that's always going to happen in every business. They can't wait for the analytics team to sign off on some ticket that needs to be delivered for the end customer, right? So, and I think every company is going to have some flavor of that issue.
So, and that's something that hopefully you'd catch in some pre-prod or UAT environment, but we all know that not everyone always has those ones, and not every part of the whole end-to-end system is part of that UAT environment or that test environment.
Yeah, how did you find out?
Well, we saw that the schemas changed.
Yeah.
But it was one of those situations. It wasn't like a simple add table, alter column, anything like that. It had an impact on how reporting was being done at a very fundamental level, right? And I think we talked about this actually last time, Joe and Matt, when you were on the What's New in Data podcast. That
Great
I
podcast, by the way.
Yeah, that it's a fun one. Thank you. Thanks for joining. That completely validated it. And we ran into that ourselves, and I see lots of teams doing it. It's never as simple as like, oh, hey, we're just adding a table. I mean, sometimes it can be, but those aren't the ones that are visible, right?
Interesting.
I just want to go back to the data contracts conversation earlier, because it's a lot of like data modeling had been forgotten about for a while. Data contracts now has been reinvented as well. And I come from the payment world historically, and there was something called ISO 8583, which was the payment structure, and it gave you every single attribute needed for you to do the credit card payment or debit card payment, and be able to work out what issuer it was, the exchange rate, and everything else. So it was a very well-defined contract. It's been around since 1980 odd, I think. So yeah, these contracts aren't a new thing, and a lot of decisioning, even though it was predominantly originally always done on the mainframe, these payment ones, even though one of the projects I worked on was moving it across to the world of Exadatas at that time. Anyway, it's about 10 years ago, but it's still pretty state of the art compared to a lot of the other payment companies out there. And that is doing decisioning as it's going through, because you're putting it through as MQ, I think IBM MQ or something. But because that was a very well-defined data contract that had attributes which were standardized, you could actually make real-time decisioning as that payment's been going through, which, your credit card gets denied. How's that happening? That's a real-time decision that's happening, saying, no, you're not allowed it. So I think looking at what was going on in the application world in some of these scenarios, and think, okay, how were they able to do that? It's all back down to the contract. It's having that contract in place and any rules in place as part of your stream, allows you to do that. So I think it's not, and that's because that was in the operational world's control. I think having those two worlds learning from each other, which we keep seeing in the data world, is we're looking at what was going on in engineering and taking the lessons learned from that. And I think that's another really good example.
Yeah, you're making Evo nostalgic for the 80s too. So he's going to be busting out some old Human League albums later or something. So, yeah. The 80s sound like a really fun time for a data contract.
It's the best time of my life. That's what I look like how I do now.
Yeah, Chris is only 20 too, but it's crazy. I don't know.
Had a very long paper round.
Well, it sounds like you it looks like you make a really cool 80s synth song with all the keyboards you have.
Oh, you have no idea. I have a few. I'll send you some files sometime.
Yeah, send me some files. Let's collab.
Yeah, it'd be fun. Yeah, 80s data contracts. Yeah, it was interesting too. Chad Sanderson gave a talk at the Day-to-Day Texas on data contracts. So it was a great talk. And I was sitting next to one of my friends. She's a software engineer, and she's like, "Oh yeah, we've been doing this for a long time, actually." And so I thought it was kind of interesting. But for data people, though, right? This is a new concept, and it's, I think, something that people have been kind of screaming about, either quietly or out loud, depending on where you work and what's happened to you. But I'd say as Matt and I kind of joke, it feels like data is 5-10 years behind software, and if you want to kind of know where data is going, just look where software's been, and magically you'll probably get some form of an answer. They're not totally one-to-one, but I think that in terms of practices, like DBT, for example, like that was, a way of abstracting out. I mean, that's what ORMs have been doing for how long? Right. Like basically, I don't know, well before. So it's times. What are the Back to the Future moments, Chris? Or can we look forward to?
I think the big data bubble was where a lot of things that we have in the modern data stack have been inspired by or been influenced by. The whole data ops world. The whole agile approach to working with data products as well. So I think we always need to look from the past. It doesn't always have to be from the application space. I think just looking at what we've learned from the operational, from the analytics space. And again, because I'm from the 80s, and I did a talk at the Day-to-Day Texas was all about the evolution of the modern data stack. And you compare what happened in the data warehouse era. A lot of the stuff got lost or forgotten when we brought in this next generation of engineers that worked on the big data stack. And now we're in this modern data stack. We've been in this modern data stack now for 13 odd years. I mean, 2012, I think, was when BigQuery came out. 2014.
Redshift came out in 2012. I think that's when it started.
Well, I'll have to go and check my research on my post.
1983 is when Hadoop came out in 1985.
2012-ish, should we say, anyway like that. But it's about 10 years ago we started getting the components which we call the modern data stack, and people coming into that were coming in fresh. Maybe they hadn't even seen the big data bubble. If they had, they were maybe using that big data approach in the modern data stack, and they'd skipped or hadn't seen or hadn't had that community sharing the story from that data warehouse, the battle scars, what went right, what went wrong, and taking that to shape what you do in the future. And I think what is really good is there is lots to talk about it now. Not only me, lots of people are helping share their experiences from the past and helping to shape the future, which will make the data world a better place, I think.
Yeah, there's no question that modern data stack, even though it's kind of relearning a lot of concepts that have already existed, it's really learning with this massive community. Like I look at all these giant data Slack channels where people are just freely exchanging ideas and really good ideas too. Like a lot of technical depth that probably would have taken years for someone to learn independently is just people on, you know, the DBT Slack channel or the data mesh community, which we're really proud to be part of. Just people freely sharing it, and also like the knowledge is aggregated into books. Like I feel like in Joe and Matt in your book, you put together a lot of great topics that I would never thought to like. I would have thought it was just like a lot of anecdotal information that I've picked up from data, but you've all captured it so perfectly with a lot of expertise behind it. And like I'd be like, wow, that is like an actual thing that everyone runs into, and you know, Joe and Matt have kind of conceptualized it perfectly. And you know, coming back to like kind of the hard parts of data streaming, you know, the other thing that I always encourage teams to look at is this idea of loosely coupled systems, and you talk about that in your book as well. And you know, loosely coupled systems, when you have lots of producers and consumers of data, is an especially important concept, because you don't want one consumer or you know, one transform job or one database bringing down the world, right? So, and it is possible to architect your pipelines in a way where, you know, one outage will affect everything. There's ways to architect your pipelines where one outage is only going to affect one pipeline, right? So, and you know, I always encourage teams to design for the latter. And there's specific ways to do this, right? You can dedicate compute resources to that one pipeline. You can make sure that they're all kind of independently, you know, I have one streaming data producer from my database logs, and I have n number of consumers of that data, and those n number of consumers can all have their own dedicated resources depending on how valuable they are. And maybe I can group some together that, you know, are within similar SLAs. And I've been in those conversations where, you know, and this stuff doesn't come up until there's an escalation usually with the customers I work with, but you know, they say, oh, you know, like this one thing kind of brought the world down, and I'll say, okay, well, let's architect your pipeline so that this one thing has its dedicated resources and it won't bring down the world next time, you know, you lose a network connection to the warehouse or something along those lines. And this is a type of redundancy that comes along with just operational experience, and you know, this is what, you know, comes with building the hard parts of data streaming. But like I said, you know, all those teams I work with that have done the hard parts have persisted and grown within their business. They all get promoted. You know, and when I hear teams are just saying like, oh, we're just syncing to our warehouse, I don't really know what people are doing with that data, that always kind of gives me like a little bit of a red flag, because it's like someone's going to ask, like, it's not going to be me, like John Kutay, external from a podcast, asking you about what's going on with your data. Like your CFO is eventually going to ask you, what are we doing with this data, right?
Yeah, I think some of the things you highlight there about, you know, people being very reactive. So the problems happened, and then they're going to go and look to see where that single point of failure was. I think that's the lack of architectural oversight, architectural design up front. And I think, as Joe calls himself, a recovering data scientist, after hearing that, I call myself a recovering data architect or an architect. And the sort of things that if you did it up front with working out, okay, what's the cost versus the associated resilience is going to be, the resilience that's going to cost me the cost, and the risk associated to it, you can work out, okay, well, this is where we need to go and underpin, focus, and get that high availability failover aspect to it, because not everything needs it. If you go and put it on everything, you're going to have a very, very complex architecture, and it's going to be very hard to support, and it's going to cost you a lot more. So at the time of defining the stream, and again, the point you made, John, of not knowing how that data is being used, if you know how that data is being used, you know what controls to put in place for it. So if you know that this is being given to a customer that's got an SLA that we will be fined X amount if we don't do it, or with it being down for this amount, it costs the company, you know, this much a minute. Of course, you're going to go and actually go and architect something that's worth it. Well, it's going to provide that resilience. But without knowing that, you probably won't, it's not worth doing it. You won't put it on. Or you put it on everything, or you won't put it on at all. And it's either going to cost you a load of money, or you're going to have, well, either way, it's going to cost you money. Cost you money with the failures, or cost you money for the overhead of running it when it doesn't need to.
And that's where you really need to connect the dots again between the technical side and like the financial and business side to, you know, go talk to your CFO and say, how are we using this data? How does it impact our business? We actually do need to architect around some of these issues that are causing huge delays in ETL. And Joe, we've seen these over and over again, right? Where a single point of failure in an ETL pipeline will cause an entire rerun, or we'll delay downstream, for 24 hours. And that's actually very, very expensive, except if the business hasn't realized that it's expensive, they're not going to want to pay for it.
No, it's the cost of people to do it as well. Engineers aren't cheap,
Yeah.
and they've got other things to do. And if they're doing BAU resets or reconciliation from restarting something because they've held it up, and the whole time they're getting pinged by Slack or something saying this is down,
Well,
they're probably not going to stay around for long. They're
I
going to
think
move
it's
on the
also
job.
showing people the art of the possible too. In some ways, like if that's all you know is just abject failure in your life, but you've not been exposed to what else could happen, then this happens a lot on data teams. Like I think the business becomes so accustomed to, reports are just, it's a day late or 2 days and it breaks a lot, but what else are we going to do about it, right? And we have this team here, and that's just kind of the fixed cost of doing business to kind of keep what we're doing. But but unless there could be another way of doing stuff, it's incredibly difficult to get out of that rut. We've seen it before. We've actually seen companies where reports would be 2 to 3 days lagged, and this was fine, right? Because the business is just so used to operating this model. And the other thing is the IT team is so there's vested interest in continuing this because that's job security, right? I mean, if so in this particular case, this team was reluctant to move to the cloud because that meant they didn't have as much control over their domain as they once had, and what they had, there was actually it's the old Upton Sinclair quote, right? Somebody's a man is paid not to understand something, to paraphrase that, and that's I think precisely what we've seen, not just in this specific case I'm discussing, but in many other cases. IT teams and other teams, tech or not, tend to have very vested interest, and these become entrenched, and it becomes a Parkinson's law in some way, right? Where it's the work you do is basically against the budget you have and against the expectations you have. It's an inviolable law of the universe. People will do what they can to protect what they've got. So, and this sometimes just means like really crap systems.
Quite more often than not, it means really
for sure. This doesn't happen by accident, So,
yeah,
I think people
that
purposely design shit systems. They just happen.
That was a diss. Anyway, actually, got a question here. Sorry, Sonny. The cost of real-time and streaming may be a topic by itself, but can you discuss cost management concerns and considerations?
Yeah, sure. And this is, I think, one of the things that's gotten better over time. Compute costs being more optimized for data streaming with these out-of-the-box services that are kind of, essentially abstracting a lot of that away. You don't have to just deploy your own, 32 CPU, 64 memory box, and then figure out all the other components that you're going to build around it, right? Because that would be expensive. But a lot of these multi-tenant streaming services that are coming out and available to users. I know that the new Snowflake streaming ingest, there's a big focus on cost optimization there as well. So I think that's something that every team needs to actually go and now look at the latest and greatest products that are out there and what's available to them, and then do that cost assessment and then see like what's going to be the ROI of this initiative. Because I think that teams will be surprised on how affordable streaming can be now.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, this is kind of the notion too of the I mean, as much as the modern data stack ushered in a wave of democratizing and I would say lowering the total cost of ownership of data warehouse technologies, which before the modern data stack, Matt's seen this, Chris has seen this, you've seen this. How would you get a data warehouse? Well, you would have to sign a very expensive contract with very interesting terms, maybe based on number of cores, or the Gavin Belson box that you would buy for your data center, and away you'd go.
And it's labor intensive. You pay all that money, and it's still super, super labor intensive in these traditional systems.
Right. But what happened was, Redshift comes out, 25 cents an hour. Okay, I can get behind that. Pretty cool. And now here we are, right? You're talking about Snowflake. I mean, it's they're coming with new credit consumption models that just weren't even conceivable even 10 years ago when Redshift came out. But this is happening with streaming right now, and I think it's really, really cool to see. And that's what I mean. The next generation of data stacks is going to it's going to be real time all the time, in my opinion. That feedback loop between apps and data and outcomes, and that feedback loop is just going to keep getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and it's going to be a lot less expensive than it used to be.
I'll give you a good example of scaling the old days of data warehousing. So I was working for a company that
It involved like hammers and axes and
actually
stuff.
partly.
Okay.
So they purchased some Exadata, and they put it into the data center. It was on the top floor of the data center. I think to get it into the lift or get it up there, they had to they maybe got some hammers out slightly to get some bits off it so they can get it in. And then when they found out you had to scale it and had to get another one, they found out they reached the weight limit of the floor. So these are things you don't have to worry about with Snowflake, because you can scale it up without having to wreck your appliance or reinforce the concrete of the floor of the building it's in.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to follow this on and say, I think there have been a lot of critiques of the modern data stack in 2022. And to me, most of these come down to the fact that the tools are almost too easy. In other words, suddenly you have analysts running data warehouses with no training, and that does create some problems. So you end up with a bunch of data with no data model. You end up with a lot of credit consumption. And so I guess my question for John and Joe would be, what are your thoughts on how do we create best practices? How do we train people to make sure that we're not seeing the same thing in streaming infrastructure?
Yeah, and that comes back to kind of my easy mode is get that technical integration first, and build that muscle memory into your organization in terms of monitoring those leading indicator metrics like hey, what's my latency, what are my costs, how does doing faster syncs in my warehouse increase my costs. What are all the levers I can pull to optimize that even further? Because there are a lot of levers, right? I don't have to ingest every single table every second, right? There might be those fast SLA tables that I can ingest every 30 seconds, and then medium to lower SLA tables where I could do the transform every 15 minutes, right? I could use things like jumping and sliding windows, and those things are all can be accomplished out of the box now.
Yeah.
When I was a college student, I had to build jumping windows in Java, right? And myself, and that was obviously an academic project. But having to do that yourself can be inexpensive from a labor perspective. You don't want engineers writing that stuff by hand. But now there's a lot of ways to optimize those costs by just using like a fully managed service. So yeah.
Well, yeah, and you remember that though, right? You remember having to build the jumping windows. I built jumping windows by hand in my age.
Uphill both ways.
It reminds me of when I used
Java
to.
days. Yeah.
It reminds me when I used to install carpet way back in the day when I was a climbing bum, and one of the guys taught me by giving me a really dull knife to use to cut it, and that really taught you how to cut things very effectively. Because I think the whole point is if you can do hard things, and translate that to easy things, it becomes easier. And the other thing I'll add to your point, Matt, about sort of when we talked about this during our town hall at the Data Day conference, what I personally see as one of the biggest gaps in our industry, and maybe why the modern data stack saw some very, I would say, interesting uses, is the tools are easy to use, but the practices and the learnings don't come cheap. And so, just because you can do things more efficiently and arguably cheaper if you know what you're doing, if you don't know what you're doing, things become more expensive. And this has become one of the maybe the criticisms of the modern data stack is, your Snowflake bill might explode. But I would say that Snowflake, to their credit, I think, and other vendors too, give you every bit of advice on how to reduce your costs. It's not like they have documentation saying, here's how you can increase your bill with us, and these are the practices we recommend. In fact, if you were to do the opposite of what they recommended, that's how you'd increase the bill. And so we find over and over again, it's really a knowledge gap more than anything. If you look at most data teams, for example, right, and we've been harboring on this for ages, but you wouldn't manage, or you wouldn't hire athletes for a sports team this way. In most other departments, you wouldn't hire it this way, and there's not a standardization of knowledge or competencies, and so you kind of get what you get. Right. And I think it's going to happen with streaming too, where if people aren't aware of the different types of, bounded, unbounded data and different types of windowing schemes, at least are aware of how data should work in a streaming environment, I suspect that you're going to see some very interesting consequences as a result of this.
Yeah.
We actually talked about this with Chip Hoyan a couple weeks ago, and she was saying, with these different types of windows, you need to understand how they interact with different types of data. So, for example, if you're trying to like aggregate all history of a certain metric in a window, that can get very, very expensive if that changes a lot over time. And so you need to figure out what your time limits are on that. And so, yeah, basic technical training can go a long way toward
It's
controlling
and it's such a cheap investment. I mean, consider the investment of even just doing a book club. Selfishly with our book, but unselfishly with other books like Chip's book or whoever's, or Streaming Kafka, or just any of the books out there. But just understand the big ideas and learn to apply those to your team. That is such a cheap investment versus repeating the same mistakes over and over again. John.
And you discussed a great point with Chip when she was on your podcast a couple weeks ago, and about this idea of starting with like synthetic data, right?
Yeah.
Diving right into working with IoT streams or CDC streams can be hard, but just having like working with synthetic generated streaming data where I can control the data generation policies and just get my feet wet with streaming that way, start monitoring those metrics so I know exactly how to do this, not get swallowed by the complexity of sourcing that data, because that's always going to be another layer of complexity. And and kind of like a shameless plug, I just launched our developer version, which is a fully managed SaaS version that does generate the synthetic streaming data with all the connectors, like your Snowflake, BigQuery, etc. And even like if you want to be really cost conscious, you can generate it to S3 buckets in Parquet format, right? And actually, Pedro Navid is another really good data engineer who writes a lot. Just that was the first use case he tried, and he thought that was a great way to just get started with streaming, because he's able to just get that synthetic streaming data into an S3 bucket in Parquet format, and then just start running some queries with DuckDB on that. Talk about like an MDS, a modern data stack in a box, which another term that I stole from Jacob Matson, who actually did build a modern data stack.
Didn't he write an article on that, like how to do that?
Yeah. There'll be some. I love working with people like that, because you just, if you give them a few tools like to see, like they're gonna like turn it into like like a real work of art.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on DuckDB?
It's certainly interesting. A lot of really great people behind it. They definitely know how to build a compute engine, and I think this idea that, hey, I can just in a spot instance, I can spin up this really cool OLAP system, point it at some Parquet files or CSVs or whatever, and just start running queries on it like it is like my warehouse. I think that's gonna be super powerful for a lot of people. And I've already seen some cool little demos built out of it, and I can't wait to see some. I know there's some data companies that are actually incorporating DuckDB into some of like their like reporting features. I can't remember off the top of my head which ones, but there's definitely like real world use cases for it. I think it's gonna be an interesting piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah.
Okay, so speculation here. Do you think we'll get to the point where there's some streaming analog of that, where maybe you have a big, heavy duty streaming back in, but some post processing happens on your local machine as you're watching something live? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so I think with the way streaming compute engines work, just because of the continuous nature, it might be a little taxing for you to want to run on like in the background, like on your laptop. Whereas like I think in DuckDB is very in the moment. I'm doing some ad hoc analytics. I'm transforming a spreadsheet. So I see the use case there. For streaming, I think we might need like, maybe we're like 3 MacBook Pro models away from being able to like run
M5.
that. Yeah, I already run like music software on my computer, and that's a big memory hog. So I always like turn that off when I'm done using it. So, but we'll see. It could be cool.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I probably mentioned this, but I feel like the kind of like what Mother Duck's working on, and other companies involving Wasm. I kind of made this joke to Matt, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about. But I feel like your next generation of laptops is actually going to be your new on-prem in quite a few respects. So why buy a box when, I mean, these new generation Macs and the new generation Windows computers, I mean, these things are frighteningly powerful. I dare you to go find servers. You can find them that are equally as powerful, but it doesn't have the convenience, right? And so it's going to open up a lot of different types of experiences. and I'm very excited to see where it goes.
A good excuse for the engineers to demand new Macs as well.
Yeah, I need the top of the line Mac. Yeah, so I can watch YouTube all day.
Or 6K YouTube, Joe. Yeah.
Yeah. Armand says hello. What's up, Armand? So good dude.
The live stream with two eyes. Thanks, Armand. And Armand's gonna be a guest on What's New in Data this week. So and that's gonna be a really
tell us
great
about that
episode.
podcast real quick. I mean, give a shout out for your podcast. What do you like to do?
Yeah. So, as you know, we run a podcast called What's New in Data. And we just like to talk about, latest trends, like what people in the data world are thinking about, what they're building, what they've recently built and launched and they're proud of. We've had some great guests, including yourselves. We've had Sanjeev Mohan. We've had Jacob Matson. A lot of great names. Matt Turk as well. And I'm just super excited about this next season. We're gonna have a lot of cool guests, and I just like the informal format, just getting smart people on the show talking about what they built, what they're thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear that people enjoy listening to it, so I guess I'll keep doing it.
You should keep doing it. It's a good show. We had a lot of fun on it. And yeah, I mean, it's funny too because we run. I think our formats and our approaches are similar, and I like this actually. It's like like you. We like also talking to smart people like yourself, right? And Chris and yeah, it's cool because there's a lot of good voices and a lot of good ideas in this industry, and I feel like this is like the perfect medium for them to come out more spontaneously than like a webinar, for example. Like I actually have an aversion to webinars. Like I pretty much refuse to be on webinars, for example, because I think they're too canned and kind of.
What I love with these, I didn't know what we were going to talk about 2 minutes before we turned up. Just came down and
Yeah, Chris was like literally just like having a smoke and like on a call, and he's like, "Oh, I guess we show up right now." Like, yeah. No.
But
Well, I'm glad you prepared with a smoke at least. That was good.
Oh yeah, I'm a calmer place after that. But yeah, those webinars, they're too stale, they're too like prescriptive, they're too like set up, and having just an informal chat with just a decision or just a topic, and then just seeing where it goes with some like-minded people.
Yeah,
is the best way to do these
a
things.
fun format that I'm doing next week is actually in Boston for Data Nova. So I like what they're doing with their conference, where it's a lot more interesting. So I'll be doing like an Oxford debate with somebody else about data engineering and data mesh. I'll let you figure out what side of the equation I'll be on. But that stuff's fun, right? But yeah, it's I think it's interesting. I was talking to some DevRel people, like Tim Berglund and a few other. Like, Tim's like the OG of DevRel. I think he might be like the DevRel of DevRels, but
yeah,
Patrick McFadden and Ryan Boyd, all DevRel people, and it was just interesting because we're talking about kind of the mediums. What's kind of next. I feel like it's video, podcasts, and just kind of more spontaneous formats is kind of where it's going, and it's a lot of fun to do. So
I think it's a combination. I think, to be honest, I have to give the YouTubers in the tech space a lot of credit. I think they've really raised the production standards for what we expect from training. And so it either needs to be a very live, very dynamic conversation, or it needs to be very produced and very high quality and very concentrated. But where I'm able to watch it offline, it's not live. I can go back and watch it at 2 times speed, watch it multiple times to really get the technical information I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, are we going to reach like peak podcast? Oh, sorry, John, you're going to say something.
Yeah, and I think it's a credit to shows like this where, I feel really comfortable just coming in and talking about, what I know and, and having experts like yourselves weigh in with your experience. And it's just a really digestible format for everyone. And it's the easiest way to kind of knowledge transfer. Mm-hmm. And I do webinars too, and those are more scripted, more rehearsed, and they have their own pros and cons. And I think that ultimately people, and this is what I was talking about with the whole modern data stack generation, where information is so freely distributed now, people are so open with it, and ultimately, it seems like, oh, why are you giving away this expert knowledge for free? I always see questions like that, and it's like, well, I mean, it always pays itself back, right? One way or another, like people will appreciate the fact that you've given them this knowledge. And honestly, like if it's something that you could say in like a 15-minute conversation, it's not like a secret, right? It's someone else must have known this as well, right? And I've seen that being like an advice to consultants as well. Like, consultants in their 15-30-minute call should always, give away their expertise, because anything that you could say in a 15-minute conversation, it shouldn't be something that you protect and try to guard from others.
Execution is where the real value is. So giving the advice where it is, but yeah, actually knowing the details behind it. So yeah.
Well, yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, I hang out with Kenji when he's in town, and I think we got going to hang out with him tonight. But he's interesting too, just because I mean he's really focused on YouTube, right? So it's like he says I can impact more people with a video than I can, doing one-to-one consulting or even giving a conference, talk. So it's at that point you're just all about scale, right? And it kind of takes care of itself because it's one of these things where knowledge isn't. I think about this a lot. Content creators, for example, like even podcasters, it's not a zero-sum game. Like we happen to be on each other's shows like that, but it's not like the listeners are like, well, I have to listen to John's show, but I can't listen to like the Monday morning data chat because it's just not a thing, right? So it all feeds in itself, and I think that's really cool. It's how the best ideas come out, and I think that it really helps push the field forward. I think we're past the point of knowledge gatekeeping to a large extent. It's about execution. The execution part's hard, right? The knowledge is that's table stakes to me. It's like how do you make this all happen? That's still the hard part.
And like a historic episode when you had Ethan Aaron, who's also super great. I love his LinkedIn posts, and the graphic for it was like you and Ethan about to box it out. You're gonna spar it out over. It was over data contracts.
Yeah,
right?
it was Chad Sanderson and him. Yeah.
Go watch it on YouTube. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a good one. But that was
Yeah.
spontaneous. I just captured the moment. They were, Ethan had a post, and it's just like, talking crap on data contracts. And it's like, let's go, let's do this. Actually, speaking of which, this week, I can't remember if it's Wednesday or Thursday, we're going to be doing a debate on data catalogs with Ananth and the guy from Data Hub. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I met him in Data Day, and I always mispronounce his name. It's so I'm not going to try and pronounce it, but it's going to be a great show. So we're doing that this week. And speaking of shows too, so I'm actually going to be flying to Boston next Monday for the Data Nova. So Matt's going to be running solo. I think we have Venkat from Rockset will be on the show. So
the Rockset folks are great.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Great episode.
Yeah, otherwise it'll be Matt just giving a monologue,
preparing my material.
For an hour. Yeah, so he used to be a university lecturer and a professor, so I'm sure he could have a good monologue.
Yeah, speaking of Rockset, we're super proud to partner with them. Our free developer version, you can stream up to 10 million records a month into Rockset and all your other warehouses and object stores. And I think this is just like part of the movement we want to enable, where people don't feel like, okay, there's like this big upfront cost with streaming.
Right.
I can just use the Striim developer version. It's a fully managed version. I can either do like hook it up to my CDC systems, or I can just use their synthetic data generated into my object stores and warehouses and start building up that muscle memory of like learning how to do streams without too many consumers down my throat about the SLAs, because you will get there eventually. And you want to start on the easy mode first, just so you want to be able to at least measure your latency. You want to be able to monitor your costs before people saying, why is my data that I needed in 30 seconds coming in 1 hour, right? And those are the types of escalations you'll get into. But again, I always say, if you're in those types of escalations, you're in the right business, because people rely on that data, and ultimately, like you'll deliver that business value, and you'll do that victory lap. I promise. I've seen all those teams in those hot escalations eventually graduate to that stage where they just have this huge business victory. They do this, they get through this giant event or this giant busy season with no downtime, and they get promoted, their teams grow. That's where you want to be as a data team leader.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. I think it's a good point to wrap it up. John, thanks for being on the show. For people who want to learn,
thank you.
Yeah, it's an awesome chat. So we can keep going. For people who want to learn more about you, how can they do that?
Just follow me on LinkedIn. That's a good place. Follow me on Twitter. If you just search John Kutay, I'll come up. My links out to my podcast, just search for What's New in Data, will come up. And you'll see my unfiltered stream of thought on Twitter. You'll see my edited stream of thought on LinkedIn, and then you'll see type of chats I have with people like yourselves on my podcast. So yeah, lots of avenues to keep following me.
Cool. Sounds awesome. All right, well, thanks
so much.
You'll see Matt next week. So
I'm in New York on the 8th. If anyone's going to go to Ethan's meetup, so he's got.
I'm planning to be there. So
okay,
yeah,
well, you there, Matt. We'll be there.
I'm heading to New York after I finish the stream on Monday, basically.
I'll go there Tuesday. I think I'll day after you.
So I'll be in Boston next week too. If anyone wants to go hang out, I'll be there from like the 6th to the morning of the 9th. So
cool.
So there you go. Awesome. All righty. See you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.
Soon. Bye.
Take care.